if folks can take their seats, we're about to begin. Wonderful to see you. And also those of you on Zoom. At the last count, I think we were moving up towards 125 participants on Zoom. And we have folks from Barcelona, Haifa, Scotland, Perth, Australia, New Zealand. So welcome literally from around the world. We will begin with the St. Mark's Cathedral land acknowledgement. And Randy, are you giving the land acknowledgement? Steve doing it, Rand? Randy's going to pull it up. And as we're waiting for Randy to pull that up, I'll just make a few announcements. For those of you who are here in the room, men's bathroom is to the left. Women's bathroom is to my right. Those of you on Zoom, I trust you can find your own bathrooms. That was a joke. We got it, Randy? Okay.
St. Mark's Cathedral acknowledges that we gather on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, who are still here, and we honor with gratitude the land itself and the life of the Duwamish tribe.
This is for everyone in the room. If you're not speaking, please go microphone.
So I can do that again?
Do it again. Here.
Thank you.
There you go.
Testing, okay. Thank you, your patience. St. Mark's Cathedral acknowledges that we gather on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, who are still here. And we honor with gratitude the land itself and the life of the Duwamish tribe.
Thank you, Randy. The Reverend Naeem Atiq is, I believe, on Zoom, and he is going to offer an opening prayer. Thank you, Reverend Atiq. So you need to unmute yourself, Naeem.
Can you hear me now?
There you go.
Okay. Gracious and loving God, we give you thanks for bringing us together to honor our brother Dick Toll, who, in addition to being a pastor and the priest of your church, has served you faithfully as coordinator and director of Friends of Sabeel North America. As a volunteer, he dedicated himself in working for the achievement of justice and peace for the Palestinian people. Thank you, Lord, for his work in educating and advocating for truth, peace, and reconciliation. We thank you for his service, and we pray that you would bless him and the members of his family with good health in his retirement. Strengthen us all, O God, so that we may persevere in running the race that is set before us, until at last we, with our brother Dick and all of your saints, attain to your eternal joy through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. And as Naeem was saying, this is in part a gathering in celebration of the work and life of Dick Toll. I've got a mic on, so hopefully people at home can hear me. My name is Doug Thorpe, and I will be moderating this afternoon. I am an emeritus professor of literature and creative writing former board chair and board member of FOSNA, co-chair of the St. Mark's Mideast Focus Ministry, and a member of the Episcopal Diocese of Olympia Committee on Middle East. A few more details. There are should be 3x5 cards that will be available if people here in the room have questions. The hope is that the first half of this will be roughly 10-minute presentations by folks here on the panel, responding to the question really of where do we go from here after many decades of Palestinian justice work. So those of you here in the room who have questions, you can put those on the 3x5 cards. Those of you on Zoom can put questions in the chat, and we will gather some of those and respond to some of those questions in the second half of the program. Before we go any further, Greg, I'd like to run now. There is a very brief video presentation from a good friend of ours, May Canyon, who is the executive director of Christians for Middle East Peace, who was not able to be here in person today, but very much wanted to offer her welcome and thanks to Dick. So Greg, you got that?
Even though I'm unable to be there. Greetings to all of you gathered for the important and critical discussion about the Holy Land, what's next. And thank you to the Seattle Area Bishops Committee for Middle East Affairs, St. Mark's Mideast Focus Ministry, and Kairos Puget Sound for hosting this important event and for giving me the opportunity to say hello, even though I'm unable to be there with you in person, for this historic event celebrating the decades-long work and faithfulness of Reverend Dick Toll. My name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. I'm the Executive Director of Churches for Middle East Peace, of which many of you are familiar. We call it CMEP for short. Many of you are church and organizational partners of CMEP, and we're so grateful for your support, for our ongoing engagement and collaboration as we seek to work side by side in partnership and our commitment to pursue justice and peace for Palestinians, Israelis, and all people in the Middle East. I'm sorry I can't be with you today, but I wanted to extend my congratulations to Dick on your years of faithful service and investment, your willingness to be a prophetic voice and an advocate for Palestinian human rights, all the while calling for an end to the occupation and working for lasting resolutions to the daily realities that Palestinians experience living under occupation. During the time of your meeting, I'm actually going to be in Armenia, traveling with CMEP and with global church leaders to learn more about the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia. And just as the church is disappearing in Palestine, there's other places in the Middle East where the sustainability of the Christian community is being threatened. And I'm grateful that we can work side by side on the sustainability of the church, but also on humanitarian and economic concerns, and specifically on human rights, from Armenia to Lebanon to Iraq, and particularly in the occupied Palestinian territories. May God be with you in your conversations as you talk about the Holy Land, as you seek and ask and discern what's next. My hope and prayer as we engage in any conflict in the Middle East is that we might be prophetic voices speaking truth about the realities that we witness, all the while extending the love of God to all people, not further perpetuating divisions, but rather sowing seeds of peace and justice. Thank you for the ways that you have done that, Dick, and congratulations on your long and faithful service. May we all follow in your footsteps in that regard and be steadfast on the path to justice in our prayers, in our advocacy, and in all of our efforts towards peace. So I'm sorry that I can't be with you in person, but many, many blessings in your conversations ahead.
Thank you, May. Another person who cannot be here, she is traveling with her family in the Midwest, is Cindy Corey, Craig and Cindy Corey. But I had a fairly brief message from Cindy that is really addressed to you, Dick. This is Cindy and Craig. Dick Toll befriended us at a US campaign to end the Israeli occupation conference in the fall of 2003. At a moment when we were still reeling from the loss of Rachel, and I'm trusting that most people in this room know that story about their loss of their daughter, Rachel Corey, who was killed by a bulldozer in Gaza. So as the conference attendees departed, Dick made a point of catching up with us to say, "I'll be in touch." He was soon and often connecting us to the network of Friends of Sabeel groups he helped to create throughout the US. We were invited as guests and speakers to numerous Sabeel conferences where we could share our experience, but more importantly, where we could hear and learn from the array of knowledgeable presenters who became our mentors. We had so much to learn. Our Sabeel experiences in the US and in Jerusalem, and the love and care that drove them, supported and strengthened us through all these years. Beyond this, Dick has continued to remember and to extend his personal support for our work in so many ways. We are hugely grateful. We so treasure the friendship and the example, Dick, that you provide with your clarity, determination, commitment, humor, encouragement, and kindness. We love the laughter we've shared, twinkle in your eye. We regret missing this well-deserved celebration of all you've contributed and accomplished, but look forward to catching up in person soon. With love, Cindy and Craig. So this work is both national and international, but is also at heart about relationships, as we just heard from Cindy and from May. It is about friendships. As the former US poet laureate, Native American poet Joy Harjo wrote, "The world begins and ends at the kitchen table." And I like to imagine that we're at a grand kitchen table, all gathered around as friends, having a conversation and reflecting back on where we've been, what we've done, who we've been, but also recognizing that there is a tremendous amount of work still to do. And that is why we're here as a group of friends, colleagues, doing this work together. It's fitting that this conversation begins with the idea a year ago to celebrate the work and life of our friend Dick Toll, who was a priest here at St. Mark's from 1976 to 1984, whose work on and for Palestinian justice we continue to build on. Dick's life and work in turn goes back to his friendship during seminary days with the Reverend Naim Atik. So it seemed natural to use this occasion to reflect on where this work has been and where it might be going. We're blessed to have with us via Zoom the Reverend Atik, who will lead things off. Then we'll have Dick speak a bit about his participation, his work, and then we will have a series of speakers, beginning really with the current executive director of Friends of Sabeel, North America, Jonathan Kitab, and then Don Wagner, Alice Rothschild, Mark Braverman, Rena Harb. Their biographies are available, are in your packet, so you should have those. I will briefly introduce them as they begin to speak. Following these remarks, we'll have a 5 to 10 minute break, then come back for hopefully time for Q&A with folks here and a conversation with the panelists. So, Reverend Atik, I'm seeing you up there on my screen. Remind us briefly of Sabeel's origins, which go back more than 30 years. Share with us your sense of where we are now compared to those days, please. Unmute, please. Can you unmute yourself, Naim?
Okay. Are we okay
we go.
now?
Yeah.
Is Dick with you there?
Yes, Dick is sitting down below. You know, Dick has always been a very humble person. And he has injured his foot, so he is more comfortable down below, but he is very much with us.
Okay, that's great. I want to begin by thanking you, Doug, and all the organizing committee that is putting this together. This is a wonderful expression of our love and gratitude to the work of Dick Toll. I I would like to begin with a brief background about Sabeel, and then say something more about Dick and his work with us. You know, it all started with Justice and Only Justice, the book that I wrote in 1989. And it was launched immediately or soon after by the then late Bishop Samir Kafaiti at the cathedral, St. George's Cathedral in Jerusalem. And then one of the first things that we tried to do after launching the book was trying to introduce the concept of liberation, Palestinian, to our friends and friends from abroad. So with the help of the late Dr. Rosemary Ruther and Mark Ellis, we put together a conference at Tantur in Jerusalem. It's an ecumenical place there. Around 40 Palestinians were there to celebrate with us, including Hanan Ashrawi at the time. And basically, we just introduced the concept of Palestinian liberation theology, which was something very new and very strange. Now, to mark this occasion, later we published a book, our first book, Faith and the Intifada, because the book came out in the early 1990s when the Intifada was raging. And it was, our people were very much they were resisting non-violently the occupation of their country. So what was strange about Palestinian liberation theology was that we were used to, on one hand, we were used to Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, but our people did not connect liberation with theology. So that was very important. So we had to help them how important it is for Palestinian liberation theology, something that was very strange and peculiar to them. So after 1990 and this small conference that we had at Tantur, I felt we were in a discerning period. I did not know what's next for us. We did not have Sabeel at the time. We only had this book. And so we spent a couple of 2-3 years actually reflecting on trying to discern where God is going to lead us. And by 1993, we said, I think we need to go on. I invited few friends, including Jonathan Kuttab, he's been with us from the very beginning, and a number of very good, I would say some of the best women theologians we had, people like Samia Khoury, some of you know her, Jean Zaro, Cedar Duaibis. We also invited, some of you know, Father Elias Shakur. So they all were friends, and I felt I needed to consult with them on what to do. And they were all receptive, and they were of great help to me at the time. And then one of the first things we decided to do is to find a name for this, hopefully a movement of liberation among the Palestinian Christians. And we chose the word Sabeel. So in 1993, Sabeel came into being, and Sabeel, as many of you know, means the way, a spring of water. And we felt it was a very, very important name because the early Christian community in Jerusalem after the resurrection were known as the people of the way, the people of Sabil. So after we chose the name Sabil, we started preparing for the next international conference, and that took place in 1996 at the YMCA in East Jerusalem. And we chose, the theme of the conference was the significance of Jerusalem for Christians and Christians for Jerusalem. After this conference, I invited few people who attended the conference. One of them was Betsy Barlow. She was teaching at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and another woman from England or from Britain by the name of Jan Davis. I asked them whether it is possible that they can help us establish Friends of Sabil in both the United States and Britain. And then I also invited friends from Scandinavia, and I asked them the same thing. And our conditions were very simple. We just talked about the importance of that Sabil will be ecumenical, very inclusive, very important, and believes in nonviolence. So anyone who chooses violence cannot join us. We are people, we're gonna walk in the footsteps of Jesus Christ, who was our liberator, and he believed in nonviolence. And that's the way it happened. For the first 5 years, Betsy Barlow established Friends of Sabil in the United States, and she did a marvelous job. And then she decided to retire. And that's when we invited Dick Toll to take over and resume the ministry that was already founded by Betsy. And thank God for our choice, because immediately, although Dick had his parish and he was very much busy in that work, but he took upon himself to start us off, and he expanded the ministry of Sabil in the States. Every year for 10 years, he organized 4 conferences every year, 2 in the spring and 2 back-to-back in the fall. And during the 10 years, he organized 34 regional conferences in 23 in 23 states. It was amazing. Most of the time, we did it in the Presbyterian churches. We used United Methodist, Church of Christ, Episcopal churches, and on a few occasions, we also had our conference in colleges. We had some problems, but I hope Rich can tell us, Dick can talk about some of the exciting things that happened during the time that he was organizing these things. The speakers and the participants, we always had Christians, Muslims, Jews, and secular people. Speakers, we had speakers from the United States. Many of them were professors in different colleges, but we also had speakers from Palestine and from Europe every now and then. And we also, in our conferences, had in these conferences, we educated and advocated for justice and peace through nonviolence and on the basis of international law. So it's really a great pleasure, was for me and is for me, that I was able to really accompany Dick Toll in those conferences. I think I missed only one or two. Other than that, I was with him there. So I am thankful for everything he has been able to do with us and for us. And I think although he has done his best, and I am grateful for all that he has done, I think, as many of you know, we are still have not reached justice for the Palestinians and for the Israelis living together under the international law and UN resolutions. That's why it's been an honor for me and a privilege not only to talk about Dick, but also I'm thankful that there is the symposium that is going to pick up from the work that Dick has done for many years, that now we can also think about what's happening back home and where we are going to go from here. So we are still living under occupation. The situation is still very bad back home. It's in fact deteriorating on a daily basis. And we have the people that are going to help us in doing this. So prayers are good. We need to continue to pray, but I think we need to put some legs and feet for those legs, for our legs, so that we can be more involved in the work of justice and peace for all the people of the land. Thank you. And I will stop here and go back to Doug, and we can continue our work. So thank you very much.
Beautiful. Thank you, Naeem. You've laid the ground beautifully with a reminder of those origins and where Dick stepped into that and stepped into it so fully, even while he was holding down a full-time job as a parish priest. I'm not quite sure how he did it, but he's here, and perhaps he will share a little bit about that journey and take us, farther into this story. So please welcome our beloved friend, Dick Toll.
Thank you very much, Doug. I am very pleased, to say the least, to be a part of this event and to have the wonderful, wonderful support of all of you, plus everyone out there that's a part of the Zoom. I'm limping because I have a torn Achilles tendon as of last week when I went to see our presiding bishop in Eugene, Oregon. Stepped upon a curb and I almost fell, but I've got this brace on now that I didn't want, but here I am. At least I'm up and about. To give something of my own journey, I was raised in a town of 9,000 people on the desert of West Texas, Pecos, Texas. If there were any Jewish people there, I don't know that. And if there were any Palestinian people in that town of 9,000, I never met them. They were not part of my first 24 years. I was born in 1939, so I didn't have a TV. I never heard anything about world affairs really, except in the newspapers and the radio, because that's all we had. We got our first TV in 1952, and I watched the coronation on that. And it was the first time I'd really been a part of the world scene. And I started hearing about places like the Middle East and Israel and Palestine, and wondering about it when I was 13 years old as to just what it all meant. I met my first Jewish person in the army. It was a rabbi who told me his story. And it was the first time I'd heard anyone talk about, from a personal point of view, the establishment of the state of Israel. And when I got to the Episcopal Seminary that same year, in 1967, I met Naeem Atik. He was one of my classmates in Berkeley, California. And he shared his story with me. He was raised in the Galilee region, and he shared his story with me. And I wasn't quite sure how to believe it. How the Zionists moved into his village of several thousand people And they were given hours to leave or they would be shot and killed. And they packed the Muslims up in buses and sent them to Jordan, across the Jordan River. The Christians were trucked to the base of Nazareth and dumped on the road there. And they were found by people in Nazareth and housed there. And that's where he grew up as an internal refugee in Nazareth and was not able to return to his hometown for years, his family. He was 11 years old at the time, and one of the best stories that Naim told me was that he had a playmate that he played with quite regularly, next door neighbor, that was Muslim, and that this friendship was so real that when the time came for them to decide what to do about where to live, the Muslim went to Nazareth. He claimed to be a Christian, wanted to be with this Christian family and his friend Naim. So things happened in also many ways during that time period. But I had to admit that I wasn't quite sure what that story meant. As an American at the time, I was receiving the story from movies like The Exodus and that kind of thing, that there was no speaking of Palestinian people, no words of support, and all the support was for the state of Israel. I wasn't sure I believed Naim's story, having heard it for the first time. And I can remember reading about it and wanting to learn. And I graduated from seminary in 1967, the same time that the '67 war was beginning. And I began to learn. I began to read. I began to suddenly realize that I didn't know much about anything on the world scene, so I wanted to know. And the horrors of World War II had led people from the refugee camps and the places in Europe into Palestine. And the United States was a massive part of that movement because countries did not want to take Jewish refugees from the concentration camps, of all things. Can you believe that? And so where were they to go? Well, guess what? Palestine became the focus. And it was another kind of, it was the last of the colonial movements of the West, because the Western world had been doing colonialism for hundreds of years. Why not do this one? And that's what happened in so many ways with the way in which the refugees came from Europe into Palestine, backed by Western powers. It was the last thrust of colonization in the West, which had been happening for centuries. Back to my journey. Naim kept saying, come and see, come and see. And he said it so many times, I finally decided it was important to come and see. So it was here in 1983. Got a picture at the back of the room there of my first trip with Steve Moen. Steve, where are you? Steve was on that trip. And so were Keith and Dorothy Moore and others from other parishes that went with me on my first trip in 1983. And I'll have to admit that it was a learning experience from the word go for all of us. We all suddenly realized that we didn't know much about anything. And I learned lessons from a Muslim guide that we had, that he, along with 50 other Palestinians, both Christian and Muslim, were guides and had been guides for years before '67, where they were being phased out. They were being told they didn't have a job when they retired, and they weren't going to hire Muslims or Christians as guides anymore because they were all going to be Israeli guides. And my first confrontation and understanding of the church and the issues there was the Franciscans who had been in charge of the holy sites for centuries were threatening to close the holy sites because they were going to put Israelis in charge of them. And they said, no, this is not going to happen. And I suddenly realized, hey, there are issues involved here that I don't know about, including confiscation of land, taxes, closure, settlements, the wall, and on and on. I didn't know much about any of that. The Christian population in the region was about 15% in 1948. It's somewhere around 1% now, maybe less. And so those are some of the issues that we've been faced with in the occupation and confiscation and all of the things that we've talked about and that you'll hear about. The first time I was exposed to Sabeel in a real way was when I went over to the second one of the international conferences. Naim spoke at the first one. The second one was at Bethlehem University in 1998. And it was with Edward Said, who got off of his sickbed, really, to come over. He had leukemia. And he sat during the entire presentation, but it was wonderful. It was a wonderful experience to be there with thousands of people on campus and movement here and there, listening to a man of his stature speak about his own beginnings with the Christian church there, where he was baptized and all of that, and talking about his knowledge of Naim Atik. It was just a wonderful moment. So I attended 9 of the 10 international conferences that were held by Sabeel in the late 1900s and early 2000s. Thousands of people from around the world came. There's a picture of one of them back there at the very same place where we had our first group go over in 1983, with thousands of people in it, hundreds of people. I do remember that Betsy Barlow had started Sabeel. I met her over there in Jerusalem. And she had started Sabeel and didn't have a great number of people and no money, and got sick and retired. And Ed Browning, our presiding bishop, asked me to come to his retirement home in Hood River. And he said, would you become the new director of Sabeel, Friends of Sabeel? I didn't know any of the steering committee. I didn't know anything but Naim Atik. And it was rather interesting to say yes and not know anything about what I was doing. Found out we didn't have any money and we owed money. And it was sort of like, what's this all about? Well, what it was all about was me retiring from my parish and taking on this as a volunteer role for my own life. And that's what happened. And what occurred was that 6 weeks after this event with Bishop Browning, 9/11 occurred. And 9/11 set the stage for me to sort of say, I'm involved with an issue that is part of 9/11, the Middle East. And what does all this mean with the Palestinian people, with Israel, with the United States? How are we going to move forward on this issue? What are we going to do? Bishop Browning was kind enough and knowledgeable enough and effective enough to ask Archbishop Desmond Tutu to become the patron of Sabeel International. And we asked him, the steering committee, Daryl Myers is here, was a part of the steering committee. Don Wagner was a part of the steering committee. And we asked Bishop Tutu to do a program for us because he was here getting some help with his cancer. And he only had one date available. It was 3 weeks away. And Bob and Maureen Tobin took on the task of getting 500 people to come to Cambridge, Massachusetts for the first Sabeel Bosna conference in the United States. And at that conference, he shared with us the separation called apartheid that he had experienced. And he made the point with us that the separation issues that he was experiencing in Palestine and Israel were worse than he'd experienced in South Africa. That was a learning for me. It was from this beginning that FOSNA developed regional conferences. By the year 2011, we'd had 34 conferences, a regional in 23 states, as Naim had said, with over 10,000 people in attendance. People that some of you may have, how many of you have been to a conference? And that's quite almost half of you. So that we began our conferences with education in the different churches. Many of these people remain active even today in their churches and denominations. Education was happening in Jewish, Muslim, Christian leadership. And there was a challenge to become more informed and involved with the issues of Palestine and Israel. Where did the leadership come from for these conferences? Well, each one was different, but I will have to say that one of the stories I love to tell is that I think it was 2005, I would know, or 6, they had the Archbishop of Canterbury come to an international conference, supposedly. He was going to give a good message on the Palestinian issue. For various reasons, which I won't go into that I don't know about, he backed out. And he sent a representative from England, from his office. And this representative got up and presented a paper that he'd written, or maybe the Archbishop wrote, I don't know. Not once did he talk about Palestine or Palestinians, and he praised the state of Israel up and down. As you can imagine, all these international people sitting there wondering why they were there. Jonathan Katab answered the next day with a response. Remember that, Daryl? You're shaking your head. And it was really a downer to hear this priest from England. But Jonathan got up and spoke, and he spoke so well about everything that the speaker had not talked about. And by the end of that talk, Jonathan's a wonderful speaker, by the way. At the end of that talk, he got a wild standing ovation. And I was sitting right next to a priest, a Roman Catholic priest, that stood up, he was real tall, he was taller than me. And he turned to me during the standing ovation, and he said, I've been a priest for 35 years. He said, I have never heard a better speech, sermon, or what have you. And I looked at his name tag, and it said his name, and he was from St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota. And I said, well, David, how would you like to sponsor a Seville conference at St. Thomas next year? And he said, yes. So we had a wonderful conference in St. Paul, Minnesota. And there's more of the story that I won't go into, but that all of that happened, and in various ways with people that became involved in the international conferences to say yes to what needs to happen in the United States. Our steering committee was active on the phone. We couldn't meet together except once a year. And we would gather every 2 years for a leadership conference in Portland. And we were there for 3 or 4 days. And we would do planning about the conferences that had been, the conferences that were hopefully on their way forward. And significant people that had been to the conferences would come. 60 to 90 we would have every 2 years. And one of the most significant conferences happened, I think it was in 2005, when the leadership of the Presbyterian Church emerged tremendously, mainly due to the efforts of Don Wagner, plus a lot of people in the denomination. But they were really, really on top of the issues. And I had, the steering committee had names of people to come and speak to our leadership group about what they were doing. And lo and behold, people moved into different groups of different denominations. And out of that, including our own church, got together for what they call the Palestine-Israel Network, PIN groups. Some of you may belong to some in your denomination. Methodist, Episcopalian, Presbyterian, Mennonite, Quaker, to name just a few. But all of them are active or have become active since then in order to do education in their denomination, have conferences and take people over to the region. And over the years, I learned that these people made a big difference and are still making a big difference. So when Naim says something about what's next, the grassroots that's forming and is formed and is continuing to form is an answer that needs to happen more and more as younger people are becoming involved and as we keep moving forward. I'm still learning a lot as I look at the map on what my past has given me. But a couple of learnings that I would say with my own experience is that the historical significance of what the church did on punishing, condemning Jewish people, the guilt that is felt by that over the centuries, and especially now, is very real. Especially since the Inquisition that was set up in 1492 with Isabella and Ferdinand. Can you imagine killing people that weren't converting to Christianity? In Spain, that's what was happening. I've seen the torture chambers there and Muslims. Anyhow, that is a guilt that still frames a lot of who we are and what we've done. And it's a reality that the church has to admit to and be able to deal with. Well, Christian Zionism is another point of reference that I would like to know you to know about if you don't already. But that Don will tell us more about this one as we go along, but it's as anti-Semitic as any part of what has taken place in history and that you'll ever find. They support Jews returning to Israel in order to bring about the end of the world. And those that do not convert to Christianity at the end of the world, the Jewish people, will go to hell. How anti-Semitic can you be? Well, anyhow, one of the most important things that has happened is that from my time at Sabeel, Friends of Sabeel, is that we confronted the group called COFI, Christians United for Israel, 5 years ago in Washington, D.C. And we protested their meeting that they were having there with this kind of information. And it's a big movement. Millions of people belong to it. You've got friends that are a part of it, and it needs a discussion as to what is going on here. There was one person, I used to get a letter every year wanting people to give money to them to bring Jews to Israel, signed by a rabbi and somebody from the moral majority. And they gave an award 6 or 7 years ago to a rabbi from this country when I was in Jerusalem that had raised from the Christian church in America, from the CUFI group, and those $1.5 billion to bring Jews to Israel and for the settlements. Now, where are your problems coming from? CUFI is a big part of it. Christian Zionism is a big part of it. Where does it come from? America, the United States of America. We're a part of the problem, if not the biggest part of the problem. And the fact that we give billions of dollars in cash with no, we don't have anything to say about it. They do with what they want to, add to the settlements, add to the occupation, whatever they want. It's our money, your money. And also the Christian Zionists that represent how that's to happen. And the weapon that the state of Israel has used successfully for years is to take anybody that criticizes the state of Israel as anti-Semitic. It's a weapon that has been used very successfully for us because of our recognized guilt. We recognize it over the centuries. And that it's being used in such a way as it is used against the Palestinians, because we might be critical of the way they're treating the Palestinians, justice issues. All of us know that anti-Semitism is a big issue still, as we watched the march in Charlotte, Virginia recently, 5 years ago, and as we watched the white nationalist movement really, take off in such a way that they are anti-Semitic in what they've done and do. But just criticizing the state of Israel, whether it's by whoever it is, Jewish people, Christians, whoever, you're named if you're anti-Semitic, you're not welcome to the discussion. And our country's financial and ongoing support of the state of Israel adds to our ignorance of what is taking place and our complicity. We as Christians have a responsibility to bring justice issues to the forefront of the discussions, no matter what. We're a country that remain the obstacle for peace and justice. The two-state solution was one that I supported way back when. In fact, I wanted to talk about the fact that we had a resolution from the Episcopal Church, from this diocese and from Oregon, that was for the two-state solution in 1991. Cabby was a part of the discussion on that at our convention, General Convention. And John Houston and myself, Keith Moore, Hal Rooks, we all put together this resolution that said, in effect, two-state solution. And the other thing was the money that we were giving from our government to Israel used for the settlers to get out of the occupied territories. That was the resolution. There were 50,000 settlers at that time, and there's 500,000 now. So you see that we really had an effect on the situation. Anyhow, occupation must end, and I would say that a one-state solution becomes possible, however that's defined for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Dick. I'm just struck by the fact that, I mean, having Dick here sitting next to Don Wagner, I want to acknowledge Cabby Tennis, who's with us in person today, who was dean of this cathedral when Dick was working here and during the time that the 1983 trip took place. And that was the beginning of this work really at this cathedral, and it became a central place within the church for this work. And I'm also thinking of John Houston, who was very much part of that as well. So it's just wonderful to have this gathering. Jonathan Katab's name has been dropped here a few times already. Jonathan, you have a lot to live up to after hearing what Dick said about your speech. So Jonathan is indeed currently executive director of the Friends of Beale North America, co-founder of the Palestinian Human Rights Al-Haq, co-founder of Nonviolence International, well-known international human rights attorney. Jonathan, you are with us, I believe, on the Zoom screen. It's so wonderful to have you present, and I can see you nodding and here among so many friends of yours. So Jonathan, please take it away.
Thank you very much. Let me see if I can get my picture. Never mind. Okay. Before I give my comments, I want to say how happy I am to be in this event, to acknowledge, honor, and give gratitude for Dick Toll, his ministry, his advocacy, and his passion on behalf of the Palestinian people. I am pleased that we are honoring him, and I would like also through him to honor the many, many people, including probably all of this audience that we have today, but thousands and thousands of others who, at great risk to themselves and to their reputations and to their careers, and for no personal benefit whatsoever, have taken up the issue of Palestine and justice for Palestine and Palestinians, and caring for peace and justice for Palestinians and Israelis, when they actually have no benefit or interest to get other than caring for justice and caring for doing what's right, and often being abused and being accused falsely of anti-Semitism and suffering and sacrificing of their own time, of their own money, of their own efforts on behalf of justice for Palestinians. I want to honor Dick Toll and honor through him all those who fit this description. The topic for this symposium, however, I think is very timely because we are living in a major crisis. And I will point to three elements in this crisis that make it different, I think, from any other previous time. First is the collapse of the two-state solution. It is now acknowledged by most observers that there is no prospect at all of a Palestinian state coming out or of the two-state solution being implemented in any meaningful way. In fact, with the hundreds of thousands of Jewish settlers living and ruling the lives of people in the 22% that was supposed to be the Palestinian state, it is now no longer an issue. For people in Israel, there was a very powerful article by Ian Lustig saying that even the right wing in Israel is no longer concerned about the fear, the danger of a Palestinian state or of giving up any territories. They know that that train has already left the station. And the issue is now, how does Israel deal now that its sovereignty is being exercised fully over all of Palestine? How do they deal with these pesky Palestinians who continue to live there? It's true, the two-state solution continues to be a slogan, a useful slogan, an alibi for people not to deal with the real problem. So useful, in fact, that in the heat of a very right-wing Israeli election, Lapid would even use these two magic words, two states at the United Nations, knowing full well that he and his party and his state has done everything possible to undermine the possibility of a genuine two-state solution. Yet it's a very useful slogan to keep repeating. The collapse of the two-state solution and the new reality that the powers that be now want to a new Middle East with the Abrahamic Accord that totally sidelines and ignores the Palestinian issue, even in terms of relationship with the rest of the Arab world. This has created a genuine crisis, I think, for people of conscience like yourselves. The second reason I think we are in a crisis is that there is a feeling of despondency among many of the advocacy and activist community in the United States and in other countries, as well as in Israel, Palestine. A feeling that what we've been doing for the last 30 or 40 years really hasn't worked. We have done a lot of education and information. It's very, very important and very useful. And I think eventually we will see its fruits. But that simply doing more conferences, simply signing more petitions, simply continuing the work of education that we have been doing so far has not been enough, has not really moved the needle. That those who are in power continue to be in power and continue to do what they want with utter impunity. The feeling in Israel today is that the settlers can do no wrong and the army can do no wrong. In fact, even when they shot Shireen Abu Akleh, a prominent American Palestinian journalist, with all the rest of the world showing with video evidence and analysis how terrible it was, the Israeli prime minister says, I'm not going to put an Israeli soldier on trial just to get applaud from the international community. In other words, he is saying, I don't care what the international community says or does. I will continue to do whatever we continue to do, and our soldiers and our settlers will enjoy full and complete immunity and can act with impunity. And we have seen the results, of course. Already this year, more Palestinians have been killed than in any previous year. And the killing is continuing. The activities of settlers are increasing throughout the occupied territories, but also on Al-Aqsa and in Al-Aqsa itself. The feeling is Israel will not pay a price, there will be no cost, diplomatic, economic, or otherwise, for what it does, that basically the battle is lost and they feel triumphant and victorious and that they can do whatever they want. So there is a feeling among the activist community is that what we've been doing so far has not been successful. Do we need to do something else? Do we need to think in new terms? Do we need to examine our activism? The third reason I think we are at a crisis is because, in fact, on the ground, the conditions are so bad that there might well be an explosion in the near future. We're talking in the next few months, we may see a major conflagration, perhaps a collapse of the Palestinian Authority, which Israel will not allow to collapse, but the collapse of its really effectiveness in carrying out the role assigned to it, a feeling among Palestinians that they have nothing left to lose, that they need to do something, There might well be an explosion in the next short period. I think this adds to the feeling of crisis. Now, what do we do about it? There is this crisis, I think, for the reasons that I have mentioned. We are in a different situation that calls for a new response. But what will be our response? I think this is basically the subject of the rest of the symposium. I have my own ideas. I will mention very, very quickly 3 points before I leave it for others to talk in more detail about what needs to be done. First is the apartheid designation needs to become mainstream and needs to become the constant language that we used. This is a situation of apartheid, not because it's like South Africa. In fact, it's much worse than South Africa, but because it fulfills the 3 criterion under international law of what apartheid is. So we need to name it as apartheid, and we need to act on consequence of that naming. Just like the churches acted against apartheid in South Africa and was at the vanguard of the movement to remove that scourge, we need to use the apartheid designation and follow through on it. Secondly, we need to be conscious of and to fight the battle against the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism, as Dictol has mentioned already, has been used as an effective weapon against anybody who talks about justice or who talks about Palestinian rights. Now there are attempts to legally canonize the IHRA definition, which conflates anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, and which allows or forces progressive people to be on the defensive anytime they speak about Palestinian rights, to prove that they are not violating IHRA definition and that they are not guilty of anti-Semitism. And third, very briefly, since my time is up, we need to find ways to translate the increasing knowledge and support and information that is now prevalent in the United States through social media, through human rights reports, and through our own advocacy and information. We need to find a way to translate that knowledge base into political action and political influence and legislation on the Hill. It is not enough to have a higher and higher percentage of people, particularly Democrats, particularly younger people, including younger Jews, being conscious of the justice demands of the Palestinians. That is not enough. We need to find mechanisms to translate that increased knowledge, which frankly, you have been working on for many, many years, which we are really succeeding, because now it has become known to many people that the Israeli narrative is a false one, that there is such a thing as a Palestinian people, that they are human beings entitled to justice, to human rights, and to equality. We need to find a way to translate that increasing knowledge into political activism and political power. These, I think, are the challenges. And with this, I think my 10 or 12 minutes that I was allotted are over. And I look forward to hearing from the other speakers and from all of you how we can do. What do we do now, given the crisis we are facing? Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jonathan. And thank you. You've laid that out very clearly, and there is a charge before us, and we will hear what how our speakers respond. I'm going to turn to my friend on my left here, Don Wagner, who has come in from Chicago to celebrate this occasion. Don, as many of you know, has been doing this work most of his adult life. He's an ordained Presbyterian clergyman, co-founder, director of Evangelicals for Middle East Understanding. There was a time he thought of himself as an evangelical. Served as Middle East Director for Mercy Corps, Professor of Middle East Studies, North Park University in Chicago, has authored 6 books. Most recently, if I can put in a plug, just published Glory to God in the Lowest, Journeys to an Unholy Land. Copies are available there in the back. I'm going to share just a paragraph or two from it. Back in February, I believe it was actually Christmas time, 1987, Don, I think, had been in Cyprus and heard that there was an outbreak, an uprising, a nonviolent uprising going on in both Gaza and in the West Bank. and was invited to go check it out. And this is what Don writes. It was my last Sunday before Christmas, and since I was in Jerusalem, I wanted to attend worship at St. George's Anglican Cathedral. Several friends told me about the Reverend Naim Atik, who was different from the rest of the priests and bishops. They were right. Canon Atik preached an Advent sermon on Jesus' birth into poverty and oppression under the Roman Empire. His message was a call for justice and solidarity with the poor and marginalized. I was determined to introduce myself and have a conversation after the service. Before the benediction, Reverend Atik invited the congregation to stay, join him for coffee and discussion. In light of events of the Intifada, joining Reverend Atik in the discussion was Palestinian attorney Jonathan Kattab, whom I had met a few years earlier at a conference in the United States. They discussed the sermon, the biblical text for the day, applied the Christian faith to justice and the need for involvement in the Intifada. So here we are, all these years later. And on the one hand, I'm just celebrating these folks, these friends who've been doing this work for so long. And I'm also echoing what Jonathan has said in that sense of almost desperation. Here we are, right? And so I turn it over to Don to respond to Jonathan's call and to what we've heard so far.
Well, thank you, Doug. It's really humbling, to be here and to be asked, standing on the shoulders of Jonathan, following him, of people who I have learned from, and Naim, a mentor, and then Dick Toll, who I followed. I was the national program director, and what a high bar to try to follow Dick Toll. He and Elaine had me in their home, and I was totally overwhelmed that the mantle was being passed to me. But it's been a real learning curve, a humbling one, and the key is we're not doing this alone. A massive cloud of witnesses, and it's not about me. It's really about Palestine. It's about bringing the kingdom of God and doing this with a global community to stand for justice and take the risks that Palestinians take every day. So let me try to follow Jonathan. I can't, but here are a few thoughts. I would echo what Jonathan has said. This is probably the worst case the Palestinians have been in since the Nakba. The first Intifada was the good old days, really. To look at where we are now, it's deeply depressing. And by the way, I see my wife out there. Hi, Beeb. So here are just a few points. These are kind of bullet points I want to make without developing them in length. But this is the context. It's the worst situation the Palestinians have been in since 1948, 49, and the aftermath. But yet, the Chinese symbol for crisis has two parts to it. You know the story: danger and opportunity. It's deeply dangerous, but the opportunities are beneath the radar, and we have to unearth them. So what I feel our task is to center Palestinians, listen to them, learn, and see what their agenda, their crisis is. Because it's, again, not about me. It's not about us. So here are just a few points. I think Fosna is perhaps strategically, divinely placed to do certain things, to be a prophetic voice of liberation and justice in doing this work in partnership for others. And the first place I'd like to name is in the interdenominational PIN groups, which have been mentioned, that Fosna is and must be a part of that. and be the one that pushes the envelope open as they relay what the Palestinians are doing on the ground, not only in Sabeel, but Kairos, Palestine, and with the various Muslim groups and the progressive Jewish groups. That FASNA can play a prophetic role, pushing denominational resolutions deeper and forward, such as apartheid. And maybe taking the risk at times when some of the other denominations have to pull back. So that would be one of the first places. But not only to do it with the PIN groups interdenominationally, but we now have Jewish Voice for Peace, American Muslims for Palestine, and we do this intersectionally with Black Lives Matter, with Black, Brown, and we have an opportunity to work in partnership with the denominations, but interfaith and with progressive secular groups, and to work at the grassroots primarily, but also to work at the legislative level, so at the top and at the bottom, but the grassroots should have the priority. So that's number one. Number two, that we have to get back and really focus on liberation theology. That is the gift. It transformed my theology from a very evangelical person than a moderate liberal. I would say liberal Protestant Christian Zionist. I'll come back to that. That's an area we have to work on. But liberation theology, the theology of Jesus, of the Beatitudes, of Matthew 25, that's liberating. It calls us to the preferential option of the poor. That's why I titled the book, Glory to God in the Lowest. And the lowest is not in terms of distance or any kind of hierarchical, that these are the ones who are paying the price of injustice, who also have the wisdom and the creativity to guide us. And we listen and center them. That's the Palestinians, the progressive Israelis, who are on the ground paying the price. So liberation theology and getting back, being grounded, this is where Sabeel began. I think Sabeel really began when Naim was preaching those sermons on the first Intifada, and then the dialogues were happening, and they were ministering to the people, parents whose kids were in prison, who were trying to figure out, how can I be a Christian, a faithful person, and live in resistance and love? So that, I think, was really the beginning. And then Naim and the early community put the pieces together later. So back to the theology of liberation. Next, I think the focus that Jonathan mentioned is absolutely a priority. Focus on apartheid. How many human rights organizations now have declared it's an apartheid regime from the river to the sea, not just the West Bank, Gaza, Jerusalem, but inside Israel, the birther law, everything else. It's documented clearly, Human Rights Report, even B'Tselem, the preeminent Israeli group, Amnesty International, Al-Haq, right down the line. That's why Al-Haq is closed. And by the way, when Al-Haq was closed, the IDF did damage to St. Andrew's Church. And you Episcopalians and others need to raise hell about that. Churches are being damaged and getting away with it. Linda and I were in Bethesda, Maryland with Sari Atik, who is doing a terrific job as a pastor. One of his committees is taking this up in solidarity and going to Congress to raise hell. That's what we have to do. Churches cannot be attacked, and the IDF and settlers cannot get away with it with impunity. So, but apartheid is the name. It's beyond apartheid. It's apartheid on steroids. And we have to bring that down to the grassroots level. So we have a huge educational task. We have a little group in Chicago, and I know the international groups nationally are talking about this, so get this. there's going to be a movement on developing apartheid-free congregations. Apartheid-free congregations in churches, synagogues, mosques. Why not universities, communities? We stand with the Palestinians and oppose apartheid just as we did with the against the white South African regime. And this is worse, by the way. Linda and I did a little bit of lobbying, guided by our friend Tom Getman, and we met with a liberal, progressive congressperson. I won't name any names, but we met with the legislative staff, and I raised the issue, well, we feel we need to address apartheid. She said, oh, no, we can't do that. It's going to offend our Jewish friends. It's going to really set us back. It's a non-starter. And I said, well, I'm sorry. Israel itself uses the word apartheid. It's Hephrada. The separation wall is called the Hephrada wall. Israel is designating what they're doing is separation and exclusivity, using settler colonial strategies. We need to develop now a toolkit, videos, everything, so it gets to the pulpit and to the grassroots in the parishes. And we go to the mosques and join with our Muslim friends with Jewish Voice for Peace and the others, and really have a national campaign on apartheid-free, liberated congregations. Next, I'll just mention again, Center Palestinian Voices. Whenever I think, I'm trying to do this and I'm failing at it, but when I speak about my book, I want to do it with Palestinians, either to be interviewed or critiqued so that there's a Palestinian really featured. And I'm kind of in the background. This is what I've learned, and the Palestinian is centered so that we listen, and it models really what we are doing. I think we also need to, here's another point, continue and improve our delegations, the fact finding. It might be more difficult with the direction Israel is going. And as Jonathan said, I think Israel's trying to provoke a violent, it's clear they are trying to provoke violent opposition because they can win militarily. And I'm afraid the situation is so desperate, it's going to be perhaps a very violent outbreak that's coming at any time. So we'll need to still listen to our Palestinian friends to guide us on how we stay focused on nonviolent resistance and don't cave into it, but find creative ways to stand with them. I understand if I were a kid raised in Gaza these days, I would probably want to not only throw rocks, but petrol bombs or whatever. But we have to find a way here in this country to raise that issue nonviolently. Next, I think we have opportunities we don't realize with our legislators. Things are percolating below the radar. More and more people are getting it who are elected, and particularly legislative staffs. We need to build relationships, educate. Lynn and I were able to be part of an education process with a woman who decided to run to defeat the most conservative Democrat in Congress. I won't mention names, and thankfully our Congressperson Marie Newman finally won after 2 tries. Then in the recent primaries, our district was redistricted. She ran against a very moderate Democrat. AIPAC pumped in millions of dollars, smeared her, didn't even mention Palestine as the issue, and defeated her. This is the new tactic that's happening all over the country. But we need to build relationships. And our friend Marie, starting from scratch, got Palestine because a community worked with her, helped educate and build trust. We can do that, and we have to do that. But still, I think the priority is to work at the grassroots level. And in that spirit, I like to put on FOSNA, the board's agenda, and even Sabil's. Could there be a global movement that coordinates justice and prophetic justice globally? We had that in the 80s until the early 90s. There was a movement called the International Coordinating Committee on the Question of Palestine. We worked together in Canada and the US together and had common agendas. It spread to Europe, to Africa, and it was beginning in South America. And then Oslo happened. And in the Oslo Accords, we had a conference at the United Nations. And I remember we were called up, a couple of the leaders, and we were told by the PLO, thank you for the wonderful work you've done the past 10 years. Now we don't need you anymore.
Goodbye. Yeah.
The funding dried up. They were under pressure from Israel and the US, and the movement died. But that kind of global coordination really is needed. And the younger groups coming up behind us now can take the lead. But I want to Sabeel Jerusalem, Kairos, and FOSNA to see, could there be a rebuilding of that movement? We have the elements of it in the BNC, the Boycott National Committee, and the BDS movement. And that has to be preserved and continue its work. There needs to be another umbrella with it globally, so we work, because I think we work in our own silos, on our own agendas, and that collaboration isn't there. We don't have the money of AIPAC in Israel, but together we could have common agendas and make a bigger difference. Finally, I think we need to challenge Christian Zionism and really keep working on that. The fundamentalist Christian Zionism, I talk about it in chapter 20 of this book, is booming globally. It is growing in Central and South America, in the Pentecostal movement, in the fundamentalist churches, and thanks to the TV ministries and cable. It's booming in Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, other places. It's in Asia, including China. And Israel is marketing it and welcoming. Linda and I will be in Jerusalem with Sabeel, and on, I think it's October 13th, the International Christian Embassy, one of the large Christian Zionist movements, will have their Zionist march on Jerusalem. And then a conference with people coming in from all over the planet. Omar does a beautiful job, and we're going to find clever ways to kind of subvert in our small way and challenge that. So be watching and listening for that. But that's an example. We can learn from what Sabeel Jerusalem is doing, how we can deal with that here. But the other Christian Zionism, Mark, I think, named this, is the Christian Zionism hiding in plain sight, right at the heart of our Episcopal, Lutheran, Presbyterian, and other churches. The post-Holocaust theology that says we can't harm and upset our Jewish friends when we talk about Palestine and what's happening there. And we're told, back down, let us do it. We're on the front lines. You Christians can often hurt our feelings and offend us. No, we have to stand up, critique that, and find ways through a better job in our seminaries, our priests and pastors, and then in our local church to critique and challenge that type of Christian Zionism. So I dropped my notes. Let me see what my conclusion was. Aha. My conclusion is Palestine is the issue. Palestine is not just a place. It's, as I call it, the unholy land, but it's also a metaphor. It's also a reality that we can hold up and evaluate injustice everywhere. How does the International Criminal Court follow the injustice and carry it out? or will it concede under pressure from the US? We hold Palestine up to evaluate where international law and the rule of law is in this country, how our democratic platform is backing off and fearful. We hold Palestine up to evaluate how our denominations are faithful to the word of God and faithful to Jesus in the ministry of liberation. So Palestine is more than just a place and issue. And I think God is calling us to stand and center Palestine again in the march to justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Don. Yes, Ruth. Oh. The idea is take 60 seconds, stand up and stretch, and then we'll continue. Back on the table. So let's come together again. And we have been focusing very strongly on this history of Sabeel Fosna with Reverend Atik, with Dick. Don Wagner was very much part of the Fosna family. In fact, when I was on the board, he was National Program Director for Fosna. And that history is an astonishing one. When I joined the board, Rosemary Ruther was on the board. And one of the reasons I joined, phenomenal voices. And Edward Said has been mentioned. So there is a great history here. We're going to shift a little bit and we're going to open this conversation more broadly. I'm going to introduce now Alice Rothschild, who is a good friend. And many of you will already know Alice, a physician, author, filmmaker, focused on human rights and social justice since 1997. Practiced OBGYN for almost 40 years, writes and lectures widely, the author of Broken Promises, Broken Dreams, Stories of Jewish and Palestinian Trauma and Resilience. Also on the brink, Israel and Palestine on the eve of the 2014 Gaza invasion, and Condition Critical, Life and Death in Israel-Palestine, contributed to several anthologies, the most recent being Reclaiming Judaism from Zionism, Stories of Personal Transformation. She's directed a documentary film, Voices Across the Divide, active in Jewish Voice for Peace, Health Advisory Council, and works with the Gaza-based We Are Not Numbers. Her young adult novel, Finding Melody Sullivan, will be coming out in 2023. It's a wonderful blessing to have Alice right here with us in Seattle, and so to have her in person joining us. So please welcome Alice Rothschild. Yeah.
Well, it's great to be here, and I know Reverend Atik doesn't remember this, but many decades ago, in the beginning of my search for the truth on Palestine, I was on a panel with him, and he totally opened my eyes to many, many things, and it was a pivotal moment for me. So I just want to thank you. I also am actually going to be brief because I think we're going to get a lot done during the Q&A, and also because Jonathan said everything that I was planning to say, so there's no point in repeating it. So I was trying to figure out how I could contribute to this conversation, and I thought, well, maybe what I should do is, give a response to the question, particularly as a Jewish person. And as a Jewish person who came from a very progressive, liberal Zionist family, went to Israel when I was 14, and it was a fabulous trip, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure you've all heard that story. And so I was trying to think, as I sat here listening to the speakers, how I could contribute something from that angle. And I also want to be clear that I don't speak for the Jewish community in any sense of the word, although I do speak for, believe it or not, where a lot of Jewish youth are, as opposed to where mainstream Jewry is. So I think that the biggest step forward that Jews are grappling with as we move forward is confronting the issue of Zionism and the issue of the fact that Zionism as a political strategy is inherently racist and inherently involves the harming of Palestinians. And for Jews, I think that is the mega struggle that we're engaged in right now. And you do see in particularly younger people a growing understanding of that fact, and also in a growing number of Jewish organizations that have struggled with this. For me, I watched Jewish Voice for Peace, I'm a member of Jewish Voice for Peace, really struggle with that question and come out clearly as an anti-Zionist Jewish organization. The other thing that I think Jews are struggling with is the whole issue of the two-state solution. And as a student of this conflict, I have come to understand that there was actually never a two-state solution, that there was never an intent going back 70 years of Palestinians having their own viable state, and that a lot of the decades of two-state solution conversation was about conversation and not about making a permanent policy that led to justice for Palestinians. So when I look at this and when I think about the struggle within the Jewish community, it's coming to terms with the fact that there's actually a one state already. It's just that it is an apartheid state. It's a settler colonial state. It's not a state that any progressive, decent person would envision for everyone living in the region. So that's another big issue, I think, that the Jewish community is thinking about. And the other thing that I think is happening within the Jewish community is that we're realizing that this is not about us. That agonizing over the traumas of the Holocaust and not hurting Jews' feelings and all those kind of things is not helpful to finding a just peace in Israel-Palestine. And I think that we are listening to what Palestinians are saying. And for instance, last year when there was the Israeli aggression in Gaza, and there was basically what is called a unity intifada, where Palestinians in Israel, Palestinians in the West Bank and East Jerusalem and Gaza, Palestinians in the universe, all got together and said that we are all united in our opposition. So that we see that there is within the Palestinian community a greater unity of thought and action when it comes to Israeli behavior. There's also, as we keep saying, centering Palestinians, some really incredible think tanks like Al-Shabaka and groups like Visualizing Palestine and the Institute of Palestinian Studies. I mean, they're really important groups that are doing work that Jews need to pay attention to. And there's a wonderful website called Makan, M-A-K-A-N, out of the UK that I also highly recommend. So if we think about what our work is as Jewish people in the country that we live in, it's the things I've mentioned. It's also really challenging this IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. And the other thing I think is that we need to work to end Israeli exceptionalism. Israel's a country. It's not a very special country. It doesn't behave particularly better than anyone else. And it needs to be within the community of nations and held accountable as one of those nations. So that's another job for Jews in this country. And the last thing I'm just going to mention is this whole direction that we all need to be working cross-sectionally. So for instance, there's an increasing understanding within the Jewish community that fighting Israeli colonialism and racism is connected to police brutality in the United States, and joining with our Black and brown sisters, brothers, cousins, and other folks, that this is the direction we're going in. So, and as has been mentioned, we need to support people like Rashida Tlaib in Congress and people in our government that are getting the message, and they need to hear from us. The other thing that's happening is that there's much more awareness of other industries that contribute to this. I don't know if you've been following this, but a woman who worked at Google, who's Jewish, who came from a Zionist family and then got the light, actually got into a big struggle with Google when she found out they were doing all of this work on Palestinian surveillance and artificial intelligence, and got harassed to pieces and finally had to leave. And she's gone public. And so this kind of information is critical, and she's doing it as a Jewish person. So it's very powerful because of who she is, and also because she was inside Google for 7 years and really saw what was going on. And I think the other thing I forgot to mention is in this struggle against the definition of anti-Semitism that the State Department has put out, that if we look at our country, anti-Semitism in this country is nested in right-wing white supremacy and fascism and movements that do not benefit us here. So when we're fighting the definition of anti-Semitism put out by the State Department, we're actually fighting the incipient fascistic movements and skinheads and folks, and, neo-Nazis that are in our own country. And so I think, sort of in conclusion, because I promised not to talk very long, that I see the work of all of us, and I see the work of the Jewish community is one of an anti-racist struggle, a struggle for human rights, and an anti-colonial, anti-apartheid struggle. And so there has been mention of all the ways we can do that, but that's how I think we have to frame this. And that when we think about, well, what are we struggling for? I think we should be honest that as we look to the future, that a democratic, secular state in Palestine is the way to go for everybody to have the maximum possibility for justice and to live a life that is not the current life that they're living now. And no one has quite said that, but I think that I would like to say that up front. So I'm going to stop now because I think we should have a conversation and leave time for that.
Beautiful, thank you. Mark. Thank you, Alice. Our next speaker, Mark Braverman, Jewish American psychologist with deep family roots in the Holy Land. In his writing and speaking, Mark focuses on the role of religious beliefs and theology, as well as the function of interfaith relations in the current search for just peace between Israelis and Palestinians. He is the executive director of Kairos USA, ecumenical organization of churches in the US, founded in response to the Kairos call of the Palestinian Christians. And in fact, the US response to Kairos document, FOSNA was involved in the writing of that. There's been a close relationship for a long time between the Kairos movement and Kairos USA, and certainly FOSNA. Mark is the author of 2 volumes, both of which are available back there on the table, Fatal Embrace and A Wall in Jerusalem. So Mark?
Thanks, Doug.
Yeah.
That was very impressive, Alice. I'm going to try to do my best. And like Alice, also, I don't have that much. I don't have very much to add. So I may underscore a couple of points that have been made and maybe make a few of my own. I do want to remember what Alice just said about the 2-state solution. There was never a 2-state solution. In fact, you can go back not 70 years, but 100 years to what the powers were doing at the close of World War I in terms of preserving the kind of the pre-colonial or the imperial world order. So if you haven't read Rashid Khaledi's The 100 Years' War on Palestine, it's great. It's really good to know this stuff. Also, I would recommend Nura Erakat's Justice for Some, which covers the same territory in some ways even more impressively than Khaledi in terms of what we understand about international law. And we throw around the term international law like we throw around the word 2-state solution. International law was invented by the victorious European powers after World War I to find some way to continue that colonial world order with the new reconfiguration of the world. And the Palestinians never had a shot at even token nationhood or token recognition of self-determination. So it goes way back. And yes, and as John points out to me, that includes the UN. So it goes on and on. I'll mention Noura Erakat again when we get to talking about apartheid. So if I want to talk about the churches. And if I slip into the first person pronouns when I talk about churches and Christians, it's not because I'm confused, right? I'm Jewish, but often after in the strange career that I've had since 2006, after preaching from the lectionary, and it happened right here in St. Mark's years ago, on a Sunday morning, people come up to me afterwards and say, well, when did you convert to Christianity? And I never really knew how to answer that question. I finally came up with the right answer, which was, you know, I really don't know what that would mean, but I wish things had gone differently in the first century so that I wouldn't have to be answering that question. Jesus was the best Jew. And, you know, we like to talk about what Jesus would say if he came back today. I mean, I think one thing he would say, and I'll come back to another thing that I think he would say. One thing he would say was, oh, wait a minute, no. This wasn't, I was not about starting another religion. How did that happen? Right? And to create more divisions and more languages and more of that kind of conflict. Jesus was a radical Jewish reformer, a grassroots organizer, who was standing up to the temple state, the Jewish theocracy, the church, if you will, of his time, which had thrown in with empire and saying, this is not Torah. This is not what God wants of us. But to be fair, he did go one huge step further, which is to say, this temple comes down. This whole system comes down. This whole idea of a chosen people and a tribe and building a house to God and being special about as being the builders of that house, and others can come in, but we're in charge. That has to come down. That's what got him in such trouble. Because when he stood up to the temple state, to the priests and the Pharisees and the puppet kings, guess who he was standing up to? And the empire doesn't put up with that. So, yeah, so that's why what I'm doing here as a Jew, and many of you know the work that I've been involved in, the privilege to work with so many people, and we stand on the shoulders of Naim and Don and Dick and so many others, but especially in the room today, those three. It's not ironic, maybe a thing of amazement, but not of irony, that the reason I'm here is because of a Palestinian priest who we heard from earlier today, who, when I walked into the offices of Sabeel in Jerusalem 16 years ago, a Jew in pieces, torn apart, my heart broken, raised as a Zionist, steeped in the Jewish tradition, fluent in Hebrew, family, as Doug said, family roots deep in Palestine. My grandfather was born in the old city. Torn apart and heartbroken by what I had seen in pieces, really. I walk into the offices of Sabeel, and there is Nora Carmi, and there is Naim, and we get the Sabeel lecture that you get when you are on a pilgrimage. And that was the beginning of me putting myself back together again in a whole new, wonderful, whole way. I walked out of there with Naim's book, read the book, realized that it was what I had been taught all my life as a Jew, justice, only justice, and that I had just been missing the last prophet, the last installment, right? I talk about the Pentateuch as Kingdom of God version 1, the prophets 1.5, and guess what's 2.0? It's the Gospels. And of course, I wasn't supposed to read the Gospels. It was like today, if you open up the Quran, the fire will come out and consume you, right? You don't open up the New Testament. That's Jesus. That's death. That's destruction. That's danger. That's the tragedy of church Jewish history. So Jesus would really weep about that if he were to see that today, and he probably is doing just that. So I came home and I started to hear about this, about Sabeel here. And before I knew it, I was in Portland, Oregon that same year, walked into a church in Portland where Sabeel had a little office, and there was another Anglican priest who, and I walked out of Sabeel in Jerusalem with one book. Dick loaded me up with like this. Wouldn't take a cent. And that was the beginning of Sabeel and many, many conferences and a wonderful long relationship. And it's just a wonderful honor and pleasure to be here with you, Dick. And, there's a Jewish prayer. Thank God that to have brought us to this day. You say that as a blessing when you are just pleased to be somewhere and deeply grateful. So, oh gosh, what else do I have to say? Okay, so responding to Jonathan, responding to Naim. It was a wonderful that the speakers were privileged to get a document which, not in the same words, which is Jonathan's response to Naim. We didn't get the initial Naim statement, but we got Jonathan's response and we could read between the lines. And one of the words that struck me in the very first paragraph, Jonathan is quoting Naim, and said, Naim saying, well, they've won, right? And I spoke to Rifat Kassis of Kairos, Palestine, some days later about something else, and he said, he talked about what's on the ground now. He's sitting in Bethlehem, and he said, they're taking everything. But here's what I want to say about that, and I know that Naim and Jonathan will agree, right? They haven't won. They can't win. They don't win. I remember sitting in a little grocery store in Jerusalem, right in what's the name of the little neighborhood named after Lazarus in East Jerusalem? I can't remember, but the wall had just
Al-Azariya.
Yeah, yes, Al-Azariya. And the wall's right there, and it's turned this, what was usually, obviously, a wonderful, bustling street, a commercial street, into a wasteland with garbage, and there's the wall. And he's sitting on the western side of the wall, which is where we were, and there's no business, and he's just sitting there. We go in to try to give him some business, and I say to him, how do you deal with this? How do you go on? He said, empires come and empires go. The sun will rise again. That's Palestine. So they don't win, and they haven't taken everything. They haven't taken anything. They haven't taken what is important and what's essential. And I think we have to remember that. For those of us here, not in Palestine, but here, who are working for this and have to remember that we can never give up because they don't give up. We have to remember also, getting back to Jesus, that was the first century context. That was Jesus's context. Here's this fellow walking around recruiting people, 12 of them, to lead resistance to Rome, the Roman Empire, and saying, I know how this works. This is what Nora said to us that day It's Sabil. I asked her the same question. I said, Nora, you're dispossessed West Jerusalemite. You know, my family's living in your house now. Your kids may be leaving the country because there's no future for them as Palestinians. The world hates you, and it's getting worse. They love my people, they hate your people. You're the bad guys. They have it upside down. How do you go on? And she said to me, I'll never forget her answer. She said, we follow Jesus. We follow Jesus. We follow his example. We know what resistance is about. We're here. So that's what we have to say about the church. Jesus stood in front of the temple on that last Sunday and said, destroy this temple. And of course, it gets replaced with my body, with the world as it should be, as God intended. And there are temples all over the place. The world is full of such temples of greed and grasping and extraction and conquest, which has brought us to the planetary crisis that we are in today. So this is a lot bigger. Somebody just said this is a lot bigger than Palestine. And Zionism is not just about the colonial ideology of one particular group, be they Christians or Jews, about dispossessing one particular people on one particular little strip of land. Okay? Christian Zionism is so popular because it makes perfect sense for whiteness. And we know, and the reason critical race theory is so unpopular among so many people is it's not about race at all. It's about whiteness, capital W, which means privilege, colonialism, which is alive and well. So Christian Zionism and Zionism in general has always been very attractive, certainly to Americans, because I mean, we're a settler, we know that, that's who we are. We're a settler, we have the same settler colonial DNA. It makes total sense to us to take the land away from brown people. I mean, what exactly is your question about this? Right? So that's what we're fighting. And that's what we're up against as members of the human race who are facing, you know, maybe the extinction of our species at this point. So I just want to say one thing about the whole issue of church struggle, okay? Many of you know that the WCC, the World Council of Churches, met now, it's almost 2 weeks ago in Karlsruhe, Germany. And I was part of this group that was working with the South Africans and with a global committee of folks who were saying, okay, how do we get Palestine in front of the World Council of Churches? Now, if you know about the provenance of the World Council of Churches, it is the expression of the ecumenical movement in the world today. It actually started off between World War I and World War II, but World War II interrupted it, and it picked up again in 1948. What happened in 1935 was that Dietrich Bonhoeffer came to the conference of what would become the World Council of Churches and said, listen, you can't accept the German churches, the Deutsche Christen, who have thrown in with the Third Reich. You cannot accept them as the representatives of the German church. They are not the church. I mean, hello? It's the confessing church, right? We are the church of the German people. At least let us in as well. And the assembled at the time said no, right? As the ecumenical movement, we have to preserve a sense of non-conflict and a big tent. And the ecumenical movement and the churches have been struggling with that issue ever since. And so that's what happened in Germany last week. And I encourage you to find it. I mean, just go to, I sent it out last week, but go to the World Council of Churches website. I think it's called oikumene.org or something, and look for the resolution that was passed on Palestine. And it's fascinating because what the South Africans presented was not what was accepted, what was finally crafted. But what was crafted was fascinating. It said, well, first of all, it listed what's going on, never called it apartheid, talked about B'Tselem, Human Rights Watch, and Amnesty International, chapter and verse, it's all there. And then it said, some people think that this should be called apartheid because it meets the international, the accepted definition. But some, and this was the German churches, some think that it is, the word should not be used because it is, get this, painful, inappropriate, and unhelpful. Not wrong. And then it goes on, and it's a stunning statement. It says, we are not of one mind in this matter. Now that's beautiful. Because what did Jesus say? I come not to bring peace. I come to bring dissension and division. That's what the church needs to be in every generation. It struggles with these fundamental issues about what we're doing here and what God requires of us. And the church is still doing it. What does the UCCC? What does the UCC say? The church is still speaking. Right? Sorry? Is that what? Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
God's
Yeah,
still
you're
speaking.
right. Yeah. God is still speaking. But it's an interesting flip. The church needs to speak with that voice. And it's a voice that does not have it all figured out. And it's a voice that has to figure itself out in every generation. Okay. So what's going on now? And the fact that many people, we're challenged to not give up and say, what do we do now? It's not working. I wouldn't say it's not working. I would say, this is how it works. And you get to this point, and you get to this point over and over and over again. And every time you think you've taken a step forward, the pushback almost, sweeps you off your feet again. This is how it works. So let me just end with a quote from my Rabbi Dietrich, right? Bonhoeffer, who in the very first paragraph of Discipleship, people don't pay much attention to it. He says, what is cheap about cheap grace is that it is a way to try to keep things as they have been, to preserve the existing order of privilege. Everything he says can remain as it was before. It is grace without discipleship, grace without the cross, grace without Jesus Christ living and incarnate. Okay, so we know what costly grace is. So when we feel like, oh God, we're losing, remember. And then I'll just end with, what was it now? Almost 60 years ago, Martin Luther King Jr., letter from Birmingham jail. Yeah. Right? Where he says, the judgment of God is upon the church as never before. If the church cannot reclaim or recapture the sacrificial spirit of the early church, it will lose its authenticity. It will forfeit the loyalty of millions and will be dismissed as a social club with no relevance and no meaning for the 20th century. Could have said that today, and he'll say it tomorrow. Thanks.
So, thank you. I can count on my Jewish friend Mark to be the most evangelical and Jesus preaching person I know. Rena Harb, you get to have the final word of this part of the conversation. Rena is the co-founder and core organizer with Palestiniat, Palestinian grassroots feminist collective based in Seattle that organizes at the intersection of anti-colonialism and gender justice. She continues to fight for the liberation of Palestine as a member of the diaspora through education, building awareness through an anti-imperialist lens. And grateful for your presence here, and please share with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today. I appreciate it. Thank you for being here and thank you for having me. I was recently introduced to an exercise before we begin, and I know we've been sitting for a really long time, so I really just want to take a moment to reground us in the work that we're doing and the why. So I'm going to ask you to call in an ancestor, either one that comes before you, one that you are with, or one that you might not even know of. Call them into this space and center them while I'm speaking, and also just in general while we continue this talk and discussion. I'm going to give you just about 10 seconds and then we can continue on.
Thank you.
Thank you. So as I was listening, and as many of the other panelists have been talking about, a lot of the things that I wanted to say have already been said. But something that I did want to share with you is my last name is Harb. Does anybody know what that means? And any Arabic speakers don't? Yeah. Yes, my last name means war. So you can think it's pretty interesting. When I went to Ben Gurion Airport and I was detained for 4 hours and heavily questioned and asked about who I am, who my ancestors are, who my dad is, who my mom is, and so on and so on. The reason why I situated that is because it's a legacy that I have to carry, that the revolutionary fight was born in me, and it is still instilled in me, and it will continue until the day I die, and hopefully for the people that come after me. And this is, I'm centering that too, because I've heard a lot today about what justice is, and I never want justice to be an appropriation of what true justice is. We know that justice is never an arrival point. Rather, we know that it's an ever-evolving work, and it shifts and changes as the conditions on the ground evolve and change as well. So now when I'm thinking about what's next, what's coming up, how can we do the work together? That brings me to the importance of political work. And I know you all situate yourselves too as members of the faith. I do want to also bring in this question too of, as members of the faith, and using that as a guiding principle, how can you also have the ability to see and look beyond, not your faith, but look beyond to see how Palestine is an issue of apartheid, genocide, and militarized occupation? And how can you use your faith as a guiding principle to do this? I also say that because the political work is imperative to the work that we do. I know some folks earlier talked about education and how education is important. Education is what we need to do. Political education and knowledge building and creating and sharing that knowledge is the most powerful tool that we can use to educate all people and people beyond us as well. That's a lot of the work that we do in Palestiniat. That's a lot of the work that we center and we seek to engage our community members in. I also want to talk a little bit about this idea of normalization. We hear it often with normalization. It's situated as peace talks and negotiations. And when I mean normalization, I'm talking about how Israel, sorry, my notes are very jumbled because I'm not organized, so one second. Oh, I was gonna say, so yes, normalization, we hear that all the time. We hear it as peace talks, we hear it as negotiations, but I want to center that we cannot do normalization anymore. We cannot continually say, we're gonna have peace talks, because guess what? Peace talks have really gotten us nowhere. And peace talks continue to harm Palestinians who are on the ground in Palestine. They are important, but it isn't the end of what we should do. Also saying no to normalization means that we are not normalizing the militarized occupation of Palestine ever. So when we say a one-state solution, we mean that it is a one-state solution. And that means that I will return within my lifetime without any conditions. I think I'm gonna kind of wrap up here, but I just wanted to lastly say that, and something that some folks here also talked about was the importance of intersecting and cross-building within movements, because as we know that we are in an imperialist core within the United States context, we know that we cannot do this work alone, and we know that we have to walk alongside the people who are also facing the brunt of imperialist violence. That means I'm also wearing a shirt that says "From Palestine to the Philippines" and US War Machine, because the US is also a major contributor to the Philippine martial law right now. So I also wanted to center the importance of interconnected struggle, and that we will not be free until we are all free. And then lastly, kind of coming back to what I talked about in the beginning, I wanted to acknowledge that we cannot appropriate justice for what true justice is. So I want to leave you with that. What does true justice mean to you? And what does it mean for my people? And how can you leverage the voices in this room, leveraging the ancestral knowledge, the embodied knowledge that you carry, to also advocate for Palestinians on the ground? That also means listening to Palestinian voices. I think about a year ago, I spoke on a panel with most of the folks on this panel. And one of the things I centered was, and I said, please listen to Palestinians. And so I continue that, and I say, please listen to Palestinians, especially young folks, because we are on the ground doing the work. We are educating the masses. We are working intersectionally with other groups who are experiencing the brunt of imperialism. And so I just also want to give you a couple organizations that are doing really great work. Youth of Samud, Super UW, it's SUPER UW, Seattle U's SJP. I saw somebody wearing a Seattle U SJP shirt today. It's my favorite shirt. And then the Palestinian Youth Movement. Those are just a couple of really great organizations, and of course, Palestinian. I got to prop my own organization. Those are just a couple of really great organizations that are doing the work on the ground, that are shifting, shaping how we know Palestine and what we know about Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all, and thank you so much, Rana. I think we will take another short break, 5 minutes, and then come back together and continue the conversation among panelists here, and invite questions from you folks on Zoom. Put them in the chat here in the room. If you have questions, fill them out on a little sheet of paper. Thank you. It is now 3:30. We had originally scheduled to finish at 4 o'clock. And I heard that. Somebody said, good luck. That was Don Wagner. And we may or may not finish at 4 o'clock. If we don't, if there's some energy left to continue with the conversation, we can do that. And those who need to leave at 4 o'clock are welcome to do that. Some of us will be continuing the conversation here with a dinner that is really, again, part of the celebration of the work and life of Dick Toll. There was a question on Zoom. Can you email post names, titles, authors of books mentioned? That's an easy question to answer. No, sorry, no, that's not the answer. The answer is yes, we can do that. And we will send that information out to all the participants. All right. And again, just thank you to all the speakers. Thank you to those of you who are present here in person and on Zoom. And I'm waiting, I'm hoping that one of my colleagues, and let me just mention, as we're waiting, Steve Moan, Mary Siegel. Mary, are you around? There's Mary. So yeah. Mary technically lives in Colorado, but somehow she manages to bilocate and be present up here. And is Steve around someplace? There's Steve Moan back there. And Randy Ermston is sitting over there, who is chair of the Bishops Committee. So these are the folks who.
I want to mention another one, Sister Elaine Kelly.
Yes, Sister
Where is
Elaine.
Sister
Where
Elaine?
is Sister Elaine?
Hey!
Who has come up from Portland?
Yeah, she was the glue with Dick Toll,
Yes,
holding us together.
yes. So, and there's Elaine crossing our paths even right now. Jonathan mentioned, this is one of the questions, Jonathan mentioned the need to translate increased knowledge and support into political action and influence. What does this mean practically? How do we do it? You have 30 seconds.
We don't have a mic. Right, you can start.
Where'd the mic go? Oh, thank you. Jonathan, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I think it's not enough for a person to support Palestinian rights by hitting a retweet or a like button on their Twitter feed or posting it on a Facebook. All of these things are good. Somehow, your elected officials need to know that you have changed your position or that you do have a position on a certain thing, that your position is important enough for you to let them know, and that you will evaluate their performance at the when election time comes on how they reflect or don't reflect your interests. See, they don't know until they hear from you, and they hear it from you in a convincing fashion. The reason money has so much influence in politics is because money buys them TV ads which change people's minds so that people vote. So if you already have your mind changed and you are willing to vote, you should let them know. And you should let them know that there will be consequences to how they vote based on you are their constituents. Now, I know that's a lot of work, but we need to create mechanisms to make that work easier, to bundle together those who feel the same way, so that when the representative hears, they don't hear just from one person. They hear from one person who says, I have 56 people in my church who wanted me to talk to you in this manner and who are willing to vote in this way based on how you see. So we need to create mechanisms to translate the changes which have occurred and which are occurring as a result of our education into political power and advocacy. That's my 1 minute response.
Is that on? Make sure it's on.
Is it on? I agree completely with Jonathan and would like to add that. Not a mute.
Yeah, there you go.
There we go. Okay.
Much better.
We have a small group in Chicago. It includes American Muslims for Palestine, Jewish Voice for Peace, and 6 denominational representatives, and then some secular friends. And the whole child detention bill first came out of our little group as a test. And that eventually got to Betty McCollum. It became legislation. But the idea was that we were trying to persuade our legislators, and most of them just resisted it. But we had to find ways to get maybe people with constituencies, Black churches, maybe the occasional rabbi, which weren't many, American Muslims for Palestine. And sometimes if you can get 20 or 25 letters, and then get people with a delegation with constituencies, it can make a difference. I mentioned this apartheid-free congregations as a model. If we can take all of this, these wonderful resources that the human rights organizations develop, create a teaching tool, a toolkit, videos, break it down, bring Palestinians over and educate the priests, our congregations, maybe our seminaries, be available to universities, and then develop legislation around it. As I told you, I mentioned that to this one head of staff at the congressional office. She said, oh no, that's a non-starter. It's going to offend our Jewish friends. Well, I'm sorry, but we may have to offend our Jewish friends, but we're going to have constituencies and large numbers to make a difference. And it doesn't take as many, but we got to build legislations, relationships to have those, that entree. But I think to break some of these themes down to an advocacy position and then mobilize intersectionally, interdenominationally, but also with Black, brown, secular peace movements and so on, so that we appear bigger than we are. And so again, it's taking ideas, concepts, but breaking it down to a legislative action approach. And education is a huge part of that.
I just wanted to quickly add too, legislation is very, very important, but also thinking about what on the ground resistance looks like. So last year in the summer of 2021, Palestiniat led a Block the Boat action, which aimed to block an Israeli shipping company, Zim, from docking at the port of Seattle. And we were successful in blocking them, which cost them a lot of money. So on the ground action directly impacts pockets, which makes Israel very upset. So what I wanted to make the connection to is that there was an intersectional group of people that were there that were showing up. We were sending out mass texts to people who were signed up on our text stream. And we didn't know how many people would show up, but at least 60 to 70 to 100 people showed up, and we were able to hold picket lines so that way the port workers weren't allowed to cross the picket lines and didn't want to cross the picket lines. That way they wouldn't let the boat dock. Those kinds of things, and showing up to actions is really, really important to show the community and just to show people that we are strong in numbers. Optics is very important as well when you're thinking about grassroots organizing. The optics of how we organize and when we do show up and mobilize. In 2021 as well, we held a Nakba rally in Westlake, thank you, wow, in Westlake. And there were a lot of people there. My mom likes to claim there were 10,000. There weren't that many. There were probably about 1,500, which is a really large show out for people in relation to pro-Palestine organizing. So on the ground actions and getting the people that you know to be mobilized with us as well.
I think another important thing is that we're trying to change the narrative and the understanding. And if you look at our media, you can respond with letters to the editor, with complaints about articles. And, a newspaper or a website is not going to listen to one complaint or one comment, but if they get hundreds of them, then they start changing their tune. And I think one of the things I find interesting is, for instance, looking at the New York Times. Up until recently, most of the reporting in the Times was by journalists who had children in the IDF, who were very, very sympathetic to Israel. And then there's been a change. There's a new reporter, and there's also an increased willingness to have Palestinian voices. So there was just a opinion piece by the director of Al-Haq describing the Israeli attack on human rights organizations in the New York Times, which would never have happened even 10 years ago. So hitting the media, just make it your job once a week, write a letter to the editor when you see something that's like out of line or not appropriate or doesn't respect the framing that we are entertaining here. I think that that makes a difference, and it's the numbers of letters that they get that makes a difference.
Can I respond to this too, friends? This is Tom Getman.
Yes, Tom, welcome.
Thank you. Love you, Dick. Wish I'd been there. I had a really instructive conversation with a congressman one time. He said, protests are great and they do have immediate impact, but would you please tell your friends that one really good letter written to me counts for an awful lot, because I get 100 from the other side. And I also had learned when I was with a senator, Senator Mark Hatfield from Oregon, the times when he got nailed or affirmed the best was when he's in the state, and this is true with any congressperson, when they're in the state and they're having a meet Mark or a meet Joe at the local bakery, and somebody asks the question right there, how are they dealing with this situation in Israel and Palestine? They can't escape. And the answer to that question goes to 25 or 50 or 100 people in a gymnasium or in a bakery. So I really urge people to do that. It counts for a lot. And I loved being with you today, and I'm going to pass this tape along as soon as I get it. Thanks so much.
And Tom, thank you. And would you, while I've got you, Tom, would you just share a little bit about your own background? Your name has been taken in vain here by a few people already. So,
well, I'm proud to be abused that way. I started out as a youth minister and then saw the light and went to work for Mark Hatfield. And Mark Hatfield, who was the senator from Oregon for 36 years.
Yep.
And he, among the liberal Republicans, was one of the very few that stood up for Palestinians and Arabs generally, and knew the truth and was glad to share it, even at the risk of his seat. And then I worked for World Vision for 25 years, many years in South Africa. And then when Mandela was about to be released from prison, Desmond Tutu said I was dismissed. And I had to turn my eyes to the Palestinians if I really wanted to prove my bona fides in terms of human rights. It was the greatest experience of my life and changed us as much or more as living and working in South Africa. And I became the director for World Vision in Palestine, saw the horrors, and every day seek to spread the word about what we must do to end the occupation. So thanks so much, dear friends. I love you all. Goodbye.
Yeah, thank you much. Steve Lowe is pointing to me. Is there a question out there? On Zoom. Okay. What is the question on Zoom? Okay, okay. Thank you. And just to underscore what's being said here, I'm hearing a lot of arguments for just grassroots work and working in local communities. And those of you who are here, we'll have you on an email list, I hope. And the Bishops Committee and the Mideast Focus Committee are involved with a variety of tasks, including working with the Middle East Children's Alliance at bringing clean water to Gaza. And we want to be working on that throughout the diocese. And these are just really good ways to try to educate people. You can't argue about bringing clean water to kids. So if you can use that as an argument, then you can start to teach people about Palestine 101, basically. So these are some of the things that we're working on. Interestingly, a couple of questions go back to the two-state solution question, right? Example, I received a reply back from my senator responding to my letter of concerns on events in Israel, Palestine. The senator's stated position now is favoring a two-state solution. Exactly. What does this mean to you, a collective you? How do we respond constructively as advocates? Also, Prime Minister Yair Lapid spoke at the UN this week advocating a solution, okay? So that is still, that is still coming up. We also had, and this is a response to that, some of you, many of you will be familiar with the work of Jeff Helper, Israeli-American anthropologist, author, lecturer, political activist. He's the director of the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, co-founder of the One Democratic State campaign. Jeff responded to a couple of us on the committee just saying, okay, Jeff, what is your response to where do we go now? And this is what Jeff writes. In my view, the one-state solution should be center stage for two reasons. The Palestinian struggle cannot continue or succeed without a political program. A single democracy for everyone living in historic Palestine with the return of the refugees is the only program that is substantially just and workable. And then he has a political program that is supporting for this, in support of this. On October 22nd, a national conference is being held by the National Campaign for Rebuilding the PLO, of which his particular group is a part of. And in conclusion, he says, now you both know, and he's addressing Mary Siegel and Huda Giddens. You both know I love Naeem, Jonathan, Fosna, all the participants in this symposium. But for years, I have pressed them to be political. Hope and other religious language is important, but we cannot hope for liberation. We have to work hard for it politically. I understand that in the past, people refrained from doing so because there is no Palestinian voice, leadership, or program to follow. That has changed. The particular group that Jeff is working with, he says, is a Palestinian political voice worth following and supporting, even if it is still in the early stages of helping form some Palestinian consensus around a one-state program. He adds, I wish I could be there, and so on. My talks in the US are subtitled, Time to Get Political. That would be my message. So that's the message from Jeff Helper. Yeah.
Okay, I want to wade in here. Maybe I'll get myself in trouble and love to hear from fellow panelists about this. I think that in some ways, unless we are involved as actors, and we are in a way, but unless we are on the ground and are either Israeli or Palestinian, I don't think that it makes sense for us to weigh in on what a particular political solution should be. I think it's our job as American citizens to do what the world, America, and the United States finally did for the South Africans, white and black, which was to help isolate the apartheid regime through sanctions and boycotts and isolating and just making them feel pain. And we have a unique power to do that because through legislation here, through the issue of military aid to Israel, et cetera, and also through working directly with the boycott, with the BDS campaign, to get into an argument or a discussion with a congressman who has no idea what he or she is talking about, or senator, about one state or two states, I think is a dead end. It's not going to get us anywhere. Focus on specific issues of legislative or executive importance about military aid or about particular bills that are being considered or particular cases that we need the United States to intervene about, and keep the pressure on that way. And then it's BDS, BDS, BDS. The one or two states, I think, is a red herring and a dead end for us at this point. That's my 2 cents.
For us, meaning those in the US in
The US.
particular?
Yeah, well, I think maybe
Just in general.
for anybody, we need to help bring down an evil regime, and we need to do that in any way possible. And then it's up to them to figure out what to do once we've injected a certain amount of instability and insecurity among nobody told the South Africans whether they should create a rainbow nation or whether they should split themselves up into different states or whatever. Nobody told the South Africans what to do. We just simply made it impossible for the Pretoria government to continue to govern the way they were.
Yeah, I think you're right, but I would add something. I think we have to press legislation that calls for a cut in aid to Israel. And it seems way far away, but I think we have to push that. And remember the bill on the detention of children? They linked it to a reduction in aid based on the Leahy laws in the US Arms Export Control Act. It violates US law to imprison children or commit human rights violations. We need to press that linkage. And there are others. But I think at the same time, I mean, this issue will keep coming up to us. So we have to have ready answers. We call for equality across the board. We oppose racism. We oppose settler colonialism, and we oppose apartheid. So we need to sharpen our arguments and not back down. And we need to press these issues in our churches. You know, the United Church of Christ and the Presbyterians have taken the bold step of declaring apartheid. This is what the reality is. And we have to stand for democracy, equality across the board. And remember, it's the United States backing Israel that's killed any two-state solution. Our government is complicit in what has happened. So we need to drive that forward as well. So we have that education task at the grassroots. We can't avoid it. This issue will continue to come up. But I think, again, it's BDS, linkage with cutting aid to Israel, and not give up. It's a long, it's not a sprint. It's a marathon to get that done.
I also think that having a one-state conversation with the congressman is banging your head against the wall. But Congress people use, oh, I support the two-state solution as a way to say, I'm a liberal-minded person. I love Palestinians, but really it's a cover to not make any progress in a good direction. So I agree with not having that conversation about one state, but you can certainly have a conversation about two states. You can say, okay, Congressman, look at the realities on the ground, and then you name the realities on the ground. You point out that there's already a one-state apartheid state. You describe the realities. And so I think we need to call Congress people on that disclaimer, because they're, you know, just like the Israeli government officials use it so that the liberals won't bother them, but they really should not be able to get away with that.
Should I just add a thing in there? Okay. Okay, I'll just add
Go
something
ahead.
really quick. I think I'm gonna push back just on the one state solution a little bit, in that I agree with it because, and I agree with it, and it cannot be conditional. It has to be an unconditional return, full return for Palestinians in diaspora, and then also who are living in Palestine. Oftentimes too, I think in the theorizing part of justice work, we really have to rethink, reimagine, and analyze what and how we envision a free Palestine. I center the imaginative because oftentimes we're so rooted in the critical, the like real life impact, which is very, very important. But I also see the need for being imaginative because it allows us to think beyond our bounds of what we know and for us to reimagine a liberated future.
Thank you. And there was a question online? Okay. Jonathan?
Okay. Yes, I think that that is a very legitimate question because the two-state solution has become the alibi, the excuse. For 40 years, all of us, many of us, very progressive, have been demanding two states, and the other side has been resisting two states. So many people thought that if you even utter the words two states, that's a step forward. Now, when we get that response from a congressperson, that's a legitimate question. What do you do with it? We need to say, if you believe in the two states, therefore 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, ask for specific things. Because you cannot allow them to say they believe in two states while they're supporting apartheid, while they're supporting military assistance that is not linked to human rights, while they're supporting military courts for children, while they're supporting X, Y, and Z. So yes, I agree. We shouldn't get into a discussion of two state versus one state with any congressperson at all. But we should tell them, if you believe in a two-state solution, there are consequences. And that Israel is has systematically undermined the two-state solution. So please, if you really believe in two-state solution, then do the following: 1, 2, 3. It's a very legitimate question because that is in fact the answer that you will be getting from your congressperson. I'm progressive now. I believe in two states.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I think to tackle also what Alice has said, that as soon as you start pressing on the two-state solution, you're walking right into the statement about apartheid. So it's also a perfect way to just acknowledge, really, that's what the situation is. And so it's an educational tool in that sense. Yeah. Okay, maybe backing off of that for a moment. Is it ethical to go on pilgrimage to the Holy Land? What can Christian pilgrims in Israel do to show solidarity with Palestinians? That one's, I think.
Yeah, that's
that was
pretty,
a
that's pretty easy.
That's a softball pitch, Don.
Well, we can all, we can have ethical pilgrimages. That means we have pilgrimages that are in solidarity with the Palestinians who maybe write the agenda for us. Work with Sabeel, work with Kairos. There's a number of organizations. Don't do a normalizing kind of pilgrimage. And then be with the people, be in their homes, have dinners so that you hear their struggle and what they need. Again, center Palestinian voices in it. Let them do your agenda. And, by the end of my career with FASNA, Linda and I were trying to lead pilgrimages that were in solidarity with liberation theology and popular resistance. Listen to the popular resistance, multiple voices. Maybe stand in line and get tear gassed in Nabi Saleh, but be there in solidarity and see it firsthand. Then come home and tell what you've seen, to your congregation, to your member of Congress, whatever. Write about it. So, have an ethical pilgrimage, but it's in solidarity, centering the voices of Palestinians and progressive Israelis who are paying a heavy price.
I want to piggyback on Don's answer, which I agree with completely. But first, just a personal thing. I want to make sure that a statement that I made earlier was not misunderstood or would seem to be just offensive, where I said that they haven't taken anything away from the Palestinians. And for someone, a highly privileged person like me, to say they haven't lost anything is, of course, very offensive. Palestinians have lost an enormous amount, and they're still losing more. And so I hope you understand that what I meant to say was that they cannot take away what is essential. And all of my stories that I talk about, that's what came to me over and over and over again. That's how they don't win. Okay. And also, I mean, when I think about my cousins and friends, Jews in Israel, I feel like a kid growing up in Israel today, who then to be a soldier and who's fed a diet of racism and fear and hate, that person's they're taking everything away from that person. There's a possibility and a danger of psychological and soul injury and death that is incalculable. I don't see that happening to Palestinians. It's not in my experience. Okay, so now on this issue of pilgrimages, I want to sneak in a comment about what it means to work at the grassroots and what the church can do here, okay? Because of course, one of the greatest resources that we have is to respond to the Palestinian call to come and see. Yeah, I mean, it's probably been the deal breaker for clergy and bishops, especially, who have gone to Hebron. It's like it's all over at that point once they've gone to Hebron, and so it's incalculably important. So those pilgrimages are one of the most important tools that we have, and what we can do at the grassroots of our congregations and our communities and our denominational, whether it's Presbyterian or diocese or conference or whatever, is to work at that level to mandate and to encourage in whatever way possible, either through church policy or through individual connections with clergy, is to make sure that as many of the tens of thousands of Christians who go over there on, quote, pilgrimages to, quote, walk in the way of Jesus, that's what happens, that they not only walk where Jesus walked, but they see what Jesus saw, and especially in terms of the leaders of the churches, because that translates into what Alice was saying before, someone was saying before, you go into that congressperson or senator's office and you're the bishop or you're the pastor or you're the priest with half a dozen of your congregants. That makes a difference because the churches obviously have huge political power. So let's hear from the other side of the churches who are saying our policies are wrong for me as a preacher of the gospel. Imagine the impact that has on a congressperson or a senator, especially if you find out what church that guy goes to or that woman goes to, and you bring in a Methodist or the Episcopalian or the Catholic who talks to the Catholic or Protestant member of Congress and says, let's talk about this, fellow Presbyterian or fellow Catholic. That's huge.
Yeah. Hey, we need to pass it over. How did we get this gender separation? We kind of have a apartheid situation on stage.
There we go.
There we go.
I just had a quick comment. I think when we're going to Palestine, we also should be really careful about what I call occupation tourism. So if you are going to Palestine, you need to have a job that is going to uplift or educate or improve the state of Palestinians and your ability to come and say that back home. Because my experience has been that Palestinian communities tend to be incredibly generous. Everybody's feeding you, taking time off from whatever they're supposed to be doing. And we're very entitled white people, and we arrive and think we're going to have the full show of what it's like to be a Palestinian. And I think we have to be very sensitive to that and very aware that we need to support the people who are taking time out of their lives to share what their lives are about. And the worst thing is to come home and go, oh my God, it was so terrible, and then do nothing, because then you shouldn't have gone in the first place.
Right. Yeah. And I know Huda is waiting to say something, and as she's coming up here to get the mic, I'll just add, I'm not sure if Mike Spath is out there on Zoom, but Mike Spath leads trips through the Indiana Center for Middle East Peace, I think, something like that. And he will be leading another trip. This is an advertisement on behalf of Mike, my former co-chair of FOSNA. And you can find Mike, and he lines up amazing trips, meets with fantastic advocates on the ground. And so you can check out what Mike is doing.
That's ethical pilgrimage.
Ethical pilgrimage, yeah.
Huda.
In the same vein, Doug, I want you all to know that Kairos, Palestine, the group that works here in the Northwest is planning trip for millennials to go out to live with Palestinians experiencing occupation, so that they really, yes, they really feel what it's like to be under occupation, not just hear about it. And this is very different from the going and seeing in the footsteps of Jesus type of trip. But it is about the condition of the Palestinians, and the other side of this equation for people to go there is to come back and report about it here to legislators, to the media, to the churches, as you heard, who of you said it, about the clergy who drag their feet about Palestinians and the condition of Palestinians. So we're aiming to get millennials out there and then having them come back and report about what they've seen and experienced.
Thank you.
Thank you, Huda. My sense is that this is a good time to draw things to a conclusion. We're already after 4 o'clock. I want to again thank our panelists, and so let's do that. And that includes Reverend Naima Teek, of course, online, and Jonathan, thank you so much for taking the time. And we'll conclude, if I can pass a mic down to Dick Toll. If someone can hand Dick the mic, we'll let Dick finish us with a prayer, and hopefully without falling over. That would be bad. Okay, so turn that mic on, Dick, and thank you so much, everybody, for sharing this afternoon. Oh, thank you, yeah. Push it in.
Hello?
There you go.
Yeah, my foot fell asleep. Oh, goodness. This has been a wonderful event for all of us. And I was delinquent in not, because she wasn't here, Elaine Kelly, Don mentioned, stand up, Elaine. If I have to give credit for anyone making Friends of Sabeel North America work, the way it did in the conferences. Elaine Kelly did, because she made me work. And I really want to thank her. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And let us finalize our time together with a prayer. God, you're in the midst of us. We belong to you, and for your purposes have we been created. We have gathered our lives here, and the Spirit moves within those gathered as well as on our Zoom call. And our ministries are many and varied, with new possibilities for the future, knowing that the future belongs to you, our Creator. But we are a part of that future as we move in the direction of what lies ahead. And what lies ahead includes justice and peace, the love of neighbor, the love that we have learned from each other and from you in creation. Bless us and keep us with new possibilities, new moments of learning, new friendships, new understandings. The future awaits us in your name. Amen.
Amen. Once again, thank you all.